Welcome back to the Impact Driven Leader podcast. This is your host, Tyler Dickerhuff. If it's your first time here, again, welcome back. We're glad you're here. Whoever shared this with you, you found it. I'm thankful that you're spending a little bit of time with myself and today's guest, John Vagueiro. He and I have a great discussion. And on the surface, John's probably not the typical type of guest that you see on this show, but yet he's the exact type of person, the leader who has so much heart, so much passion that it exudes from every word that he shares. You're probably going to hear some more colorful language than you've usually heard in these podcasts. And as I've spoken with others, you know what? We're going to leave it. And we're going to leave it because I want you to, just not be interrupted in this conversation. And there's a few things that I think are really imperative. We get to a moment and John turns the tables on me and I read something and get a little choked up. And again, I think that's where when you stop and think about heart, passion of a leader and serving others and being the example, and John talking about the culture that he has created at Adapting Social and why. And when we discuss that, I think it's really hard not to see the heart and passion and compassion in everything that he shares. I'm excited to follow up with you at the end. Again, thanks for being here. Thanks for listening in, watching on YouTube. If you're a subscriber to YouTube, or if you're listening, you want to subscribe to YouTube so you can watch this video and others, go to the Impact Driven Leader, search YouTube Impact Driven Leader, or the link in the show notes. You can grab it all there, whatever's easiest for you. So I'll catch you back at the end, wrap this up, share a few thoughts that really impacted me from this conversation. John, so great to be here chatting with you. Excited for this conversation. We got to know each other a little bit beforehand, and you just started to say, as we were talking about who this podcast is for, the Gen X millennial leaders that are just trying to figure out what leadership looks like, and that's a sea of change today. I'd love to know kind of your evolution, not only starting businesses, but leadership, leading a multinational company, all those things that you're doing. Love to, again, hear your perspective and kind of walk us through your journey, and then we'll pick that apart.
Yeah, my journey, like you were saying before we started, I don't know if we have enough time. But what I will say is, I'm somebody like, when I was younger, I'll give you like the Spark Notes version. But I was 17, my dad essentially came to me, he was having financial struggles. I'm the oldest of five, and it was kind of the situation where it's like, we could potentially lose the house and be in a bad position. And I was like, oh shit, like, okay, can I curse in this podcast?
Well, I mean,
well,
yeah,
bleep me out. So anyway, he's like, this is not an explicit podcast, but so essentially, I was like, oh crap, like this is not a good position. And so I was like, what can I do? I'm in high school, I just got my license, and like, what can I do? And he was like, listen, if you could just kind of like, pay, help me, whatever, the job I was working at Ruby Tuesdays as a busboy at the time. I was at Best Buy. I was a lifeguard on the ocean over here. And I was like, okay, so I'll just, give as much as I can, whatever. And after he told me like, there's nothing really I can do besides that, like, and he didn't think it was going to help regardless. I just started Googling, like, what can I do? And fast forward, I found website freelancer, like in that search. And I was just looking, I was like, what can I do to make 70K a year? And this is like forever ago, like, well over a decade ago. I'm like, what can I do to make 70K a year? And I found, first thing was air traffic controller. And I was like 17-year-olds can't do that.
No.
The second thing I saw was website freelancer. So I started Googling a little bit more about it, taught myself how to code. Next thing you know, I'm out there door to door knocking on the East Coast. Obviously in the winter times, it gets real rough here. So I'm like door knocking, and being in upstate New York college, but literally I'm door knocking, it's freezing. And I remember I had all my buddies with me. I'm like, we're gonna start this business, we're gonna do this thing. And at first it was me and like 5 dudes that was like really good friends with growing up. And the one guy dropped off after doing it for like a day or two, cold, freezing, not making any money or closing any business. The next week it was like 3 people dropped, and it's just me, one other guy. And then eventually it was just me, and I'm just door knocking. And eventually this one person like gave me an opportunity. He was like, what do you do? And he was like the first guy to actually let me talk and not just be like, get out of here. Like, what do you sell? Again, this is when energy and solar power was like coming out. So he's like, what are you selling? Energy? I'm like, no. Like, I saw your website, whatever. And he's like, come in. So I went in and talked to him. But anyway, long story short, wound up building him a website. And at the time, Google Ads was so inexpensive back then. We're talking like 2007, 2008 ish. And like, so I start building this guy a website. He tells me, if my last guy did it for like $1,500. So if you can do it for 1,000, I'll give you the job. I was like, $1,000 up front, like for whatever. So I did it, and then he told me, he introduced me to a couple of his friends, but he went on Google, started doing some Google AdWords at the time. And next thing you know, I'm popping out like close to like 30 or 50 websites a month at $1,000 a clip. So now I'm like, okay, I'm doing pretty decent. I got my parents out of that position they were in, which was like the only reason why I did it. I was like, I just want to do
Yeah.
this for that purpose.
Yeah.
So it took me roughly about like a little under like 6 months to get them to that place where it was like they were good, they were out of that position. I helped them out, like boom, we're good now. And now I'm like, okay, like junior year's coming up for high school. Like, what do I want to do? And the one thing I always like to tell people though is like I was always in remedial classes growing up. So like there was always like an 8 in the room with me and a couple other kids. Like they said I had learning disabilities and shit. So I think that's why a big message for me is always like when I look at that, because at the time, I had my 8th grade teacher come up to me and be like, hey, John, here's a vocational packet. You're going to high school next year. I really suggest, that you start looking to vote tech because you're not college material. And so like that was the type of shit that I was always hearing. And again, it was because of my own laziness, and I cursed again, sorry. It was my own laziness. But the whole point though was that like fast forward, I started this business. I didn't know what the heck I was doing, was bumping into all the guardrails you could bump into, and then eventually got my parents out. And now I'm like, I want to keep going.
So I want to kind of dissect a piece and part of that is one. I mean,
Yeah.
I grew up family business. I grew up on a farm, right?
Wow.
And so I understand what that is. Like you have to contribute. You have
Yeah.
to work. There was no choice. And so I want to hear from you though, just the not only the perseverance to go through the cold, like, dude, I get that. I still live in cold weather, but
Yeah.
I'm not doing that. Your buddies leave and you're like,
Yeah.
I still have to do this.
Right.
The amount of perseverance, but also kind of, as someone, I mentioned you earlier, I'm in my 40s. It's a little different of like, where do you see that world? Like my generation, roughly my, peers, we were affected negatively 07, 08. I mean, it kind of really destroyed a lot of our businesses. I lost 25% of my income one day.
Right.
In that period. And so I want to hear from you kind of that perspective of seeing this new challenge and yet, I got to just run with this.
Yeah. Well, you know what it was? I've always identified that like growing up, I had these challenges. I knew my parents had their own financial hurdles because again, my mom was a stay-at-home mom, after she had her fifth kid. And my dad obviously was the sole breadwinner, right? And so I knew that those things were coming. I knew it wasn't the first time this happened. It was like, oh my God, we have a financial problem. So I knew these things were happening. So I think the difference between me and my friends is like my friends all were doing it because it's cool and fun with me, right?
Yeah.
I was doing it because I had a purpose. And when you look at most of the athletes in the world, like anywhere in the world, right? Most athletes come from the projects or come from financial turmoil or family turmoil, and they have to turn it around. And most of the first things that these athletes do is they buy their mom a house or they buy their parents a house or they buy their parents a car. And so for me, I was in that mindset. I was like, I have to help my 4 siblings and my mom and my dad. Like I can't let them go through this. And so it wasn't a matter of like, I'm a big Tony Robbins guy. And so he always says, if you're going to take the island, you have to burn your boat so you can't leave. No plan B. So I was like, all right, I'm doing this. There's no way I'm backing out. And so I did it. And the first few months, I'll never forget, I had a conversation with my parents' accountant. And he was like, oh, I heard you're starting a business, whatever. And he's like, how many sales do you got? And I'm like, none. And he's like, how long have you been trying to do this? I'm like, a couple of months. He's like, okay. He's like, it's not looking good, man. Maybe you should just focus on something else. And I was like, no way. And he's like, yeah, but he's like, John, he's like, listen, and I'm pretty sure this guy was a Columbia graduate. And he's like, listen, he's like, I know business. I've been doing this for 20 years. If you're doing this and you're like really trying to help your parents out, like maybe you're focusing all your eggs in the wrong basket. And I just was so at the opposite belief of this guy. It was unbelievable. And like, again, another big motivator of mine was Steve Jobs. And he always said, you have to be hungry and you have to be foolish. Because if you're hungry enough, you're going to keep going. If you're foolish enough, you're not going to be too smart to quit because it's logic, right? Like this sucks. I'm freezing. I'm not making any money. Like I'm too logical. I went to Cornell or wherever. And like, I know all these people around me are super successful, corporate guys, and they're not doing this. Like, they have cushiony jobs in corporate America. Yeah. So it's like, for me, like I didn't have that option because I was only in high school. So it was like, I couldn't go like, oh, I have a college degree yet. So I think for me that the like diving into that mindset was there is no choice. Like I'm going to knock until somebody gives me an opportunity. And when they give me that opportunity, I'm not going to let it, like I'm not going to let that slip. And that's what really happened. There was no
Yeah.
plan B ever in sight. And I think you being a father at that time of my life, I had to step up early. You know, my dad also had some alcohol issues and stuff. And so by the time I was like 10 years old, I was like a father figure to my siblings.
Sure.
And like to the point where my parents would be like, hey, you know, your brother's acting up. Like to me, they would tell me that, right? And I'd be like, okay, well, and I would go handle it. And I love my family to death. Like they're like the most amazing people, but it's what I needed, right? And I
Yeah.
think that's why in those moments, you look at those things, you're like, damn, why did I go through that? Why did my dad put me through that? Or why was I put in this position? My friends are getting cars paid for them in high school. I had to get a shitty dinger, you know, that I had to pay for myself. But it was my biggest asset. My mess at that moment in my life became my biggest asset because of it. So
Yeah.
I guess in
Yeah.
retrospect, to answer your question, like my mindset was there is no other option. Like I will
Yeah.
100% do what I have to do. And just looking at people like Tony Robbins and all the people I mentioned, like Steve Jobs, you have to struggle before you emerge. And the one quote that resonates with me, and I think it answers your question too, is I got this. I printed it out when I was 17 in my parents' basement that I lived in and the bathroom, and I had it on my ceiling. So I looked at it all the time. And it said, live a few years of your life like most people won't, so you can live the rest of your life like most people can't. So I knew I had to struggle. So when I was
Yeah.
going through it, I was like, this is normal. This is
Yeah.
normal. So
Yeah.
yeah.
One thing that, as well, kind of along those lines is, this spot from going from, okay, I'm doing all of this into,
Hmm.
oh, I can't do all of this.
Right.
Tell me about that moment. Obviously, you've scaled your business. You have multiple locations. You have a lot of people involved. But where was that point, and how did you deal with that? How did you deal with I can't do this all on my own again or
So
anymore? All right, in
yeah.
the middle
So
of this conversation, I just want to take a moment to invite you, if you're not a subscriber to the Impact Driven Leader newsletter, to go to the Impact Driven Leader /free course. You're going to get the 4 days to maximum impact video series as well. Submit you into my email sphere where you can learn more about the Impact Driven Leader community. So now back to the rest of the episode.
I started to look at like once I graduated high school because I didn't want to go to college. So I graduated high school. I was making some money, and I was like, "What am I gonna do?" And I think for me, the difference was like it seemed so cool to be able to have a team. Like I want this big team, and out of nowhere, it just shifted for me where I was like, I just want to have this big team. It wasn't about like help or this or that because I was also just a nut job. Like at that time, like I would work through the night. I would do all these different things. For me, it was mainly like, hey, I want to have a big team, right? And I was so young, and I was like, this would be really cool. And um, to me, it was really cool thinking about building a really cool culture. It wasn't about anything else. I wanted a cool culture. I'd worked at different places where there were such toxic bosses that were like the power, like the
Yep.
power got to their heads, and I just hated those environments growing up in those businesses. So for me, like I was like, I want to build a culture where people are so stoked to come to work. Like people love like working with me. I don't ever say for me. I don't have employees. I have team members. We all work together. We're on the same level. And so like I wanted that. Like that's what I wanted. And I think that for me was like, all right, I'm gonna build that. It wasn't a workload capacity issue.
Yeah.
It was like I want to build a team. Like I have enough money to do that. Like let's start to do
Yeah.
that.
Do you think that was born out of essentially what you did for your family?
I think so. I think so. I think it was like I wanted to surround myself, wanted to help other people. I don't know. I think I
Yeah.
potentially, yeah. I never really thought of it
Yeah.
like that, but
I
maybe.
mean, if I stop and hear what you're saying, it's like, all right, you just want a team. To me, it's a love language of service. Like I want to
Yeah.
serve other people, and if you're doing that, and to me, what I resonate with that because I want that too. I want to have people around me, not that I can control or
Right.
direct or whatever, but I want to be in something with other people. I
Right.
want to go with it together so we can all experience the benefits and the joy and the hardships and the adversities because I know when we do that together, to Simon Sinek, we're stronger, right?
Yeah.
Together is better. We become stronger. And so that's what I'm hearing from you and just kind of, again, wondering,
Yeah.
how that continues to drive you.
So it's shifted, man, and I'll be 100% honest. I think one of the things that I learned now, like I'll never forget this. I was at like a trade show for one of my clients, and I was trying to sell adapting social at the trade show because my client was holding it, and it was for contractors. And this guy was walking by. He was in like a guinea tee, like wife beater with his girlfriend. He was older. He's probably like in his like, early to late 60s. And, he was like walking by and I'm like, hey, want to swing by real quick? Let me tell you about your, what we do, your website, like how we can help you. And he like was like, listen, he's like, when I was your age, he's like, I had 30 trucks on the road. He's like, I had over 100 employees. He's like, I had all this stuff going on. And to the world, it seemed like I was crushing it, right? He's like, right now, he goes, I have two guys that work with me. He goes, I have two trucks and I make more money now and I have way more peace of mind now than I ever did. And that at that time, I was like, that guy's an idiot. Like, what a stupid ass. Like, I was just thinking, like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Like, this guy's,
Yeah.
and again, I'm young. I was like 20
Yeah.
years old. Now, I'm going to be 32. Like, what that guy said, like, resonates with me to this day because it's like, now when you're scaling, right? Like, you have way different problems, right? It's like you have culture problems, like people having an issue with the other person, made them feel uncomfortable or weird.
Yep.
And this other person who's like, wow, like, I need to be paid more money. Why am I not being paid more? Right. It's like, so you just have, and then where you scale. So when we hit like 40, 50 employees, right, I was like, I was at a point where I was like, I don't want any more employees. I was like, over this. Right. And again, in my culture, we call it team members. But what I had to shift, and my coach and like the people around me, right, that were there for me were like, listen, this business, you built it to this point, you're going to keep scaling it, right? Because I'm obsessed with scaling it and helping more entrepreneurs. That's what we do. We build their brand and we build their revenue. Like that's our focus point. And so, but we need good people. Like we're a service based business. We need people, right? So, um, the shift for me after he said that and the whole concept was like, for me, I've realized that as I've grown, there's a book that I love called "What Got You Here Won't Get You There,"
Love it.
and love that book. Have you read it?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, love that book.
Yep.
And so I realized that as I was scaling, I was so focused on all these different things that shifted where I was like, oh, wow, you know, profitabilities and more client load and more efficiency per team member. And I just went through all these different things that I totally forgot that in the beginning, I just wanted to have a dope culture. Like that's what
Yeah.
I wanted, right? So I had to go back to that. And now I'm back in that equilibrium and that harmony.
Yeah.
But I think for me, that was the shift of like, okay, I want all these people, and then you have all these people, you have all these problems, and it's like, wow. So, I had
Well,
to
I,
shift
I
back
think
to it.
what you're identifying is a challenge so many leaders have, whether it's an entrepreneurial leader who starts an organization, deals exactly with, I remember myself growing up on a farm. There was a reason why the labor force was my parents, myself, is because my dad didn't want to deal with employees. And I hear
Right.
that in so many different businesses. It's like,
Totally.
oh, I don't want to deal with employees. And maybe you have great team members that are motivated and everything else. But there comes a point where people in entrepreneurial or in leadership, like my job is no longer what I loved to do.
Right.
And there's a
Right.
choice. And there's another great book. Bob Berg wrote it, and it's I can't remember it's the Go Giver Leader now. He retitled it, but it was about a furniture making company. And there's these two brothers, and they started this furniture making company, and all of a sudden they get to a point where they no longer get to build furniture, and they're frustrated, they're upset, and realize now you get to do what you really intend to do, which you brought back. It's like it was never building websites; it's building culture. And if you
Yep.
can focus your job and realize that's your great opportunity, it
Right.
doesn't matter what business and leading that, but it takes such a mental shift and saying,
Totally.
I'm showing up today. If I'm thinking about you, I'm showing up today, not to build other people's brands, but to build the people within our organization that build other people's brands.
Yes.
That then is what your reward comes from. And if they do that right, then the finances come from the business. But again, me iterating that in a way that's a challenge so many leaders have to wrestle with and
Yeah.
understand, what does that mean? So for you, it sounded like you were really open to say, okay, I'm going to focus on that instead of, well, I know how to build websites. I want to do that. I want to be in the business of our business instead of working on building the people of our business.
Yeah. And at times I did get stuck in those, in the day to day like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And got out of the furniture making. Right. And so
Yeah.
for me, the furniture making to me was like, building the vision, continuously sharing that vision, building the team members up, connecting our partnerships with our clients and stuff. And that's what got me back on track. Listen, there were times I'll be 100% like me and my wife at certain times, like she's our CFO here, and she like there were times where like things we had challenges before COVID where we had way too many team members. We were trying to build a part of the business that was still like getting off the ground.
Yeah.
We were dipping into our savings for payroll and stuff, and it hit a point where we were like, damn, like we need to really turn this shit around because right now like this is not a great position to be in, if we keep dipping into the point where we have nothing
Yeah.
left. And I know, and Tyler, I know so many business owners that do that. And
Totally.
it took the understanding that like, okay, I'm so in these different areas that I need to be a CEO and not so stuck in these day-to-day moments and focus on the bigger picture items. And once I did that, like it went from me being like, oh, like, I'm so overdoing this. Like I'm so over this rabbit hole of like, like being in all these fires and all these
Yeah.
issues to like back into like our clients literally being obsessed with what we do because we're making them more money, we're building their brands.
Yeah.
And that was the biggest shift for me to get back into like the happiness seat,
Yeah.
of like loving what I do.
Yeah. There's part of the community I lead, the roundtable. We're in this process right now as we're recording of walking through grow with others. And there's a point where we're talking about the difference between an expert and a master. So someone looking to achieve mastery, to me, as you're describing, is I'll be the expert at my business, but everything flows through me. The
Right,
master says, no, I can't be the expert because that's going to limit me. How do I learn what I don't know that
right.
allows everyone else to do what only they can do? And I think
Yeah,
that's so imperative in our growth and development. And it's not saying that, oh, you don't have value. You can understand the business. You taught yourself how to code.
right.
You did those things because obviously it was an interest and had to. Different than, when you're in eighth grade and you talk about your teachers like, maybe you should go do something else. Well, what I hear from that is you finally found something you're like, oh, this is kind of interesting and I have to do it. I'm convinced people can learn anything once they're there.
Totally.
And it's just choosing to say, okay, now as a leader, I have to realize my greatest opportunity is not to stand there on the assembly line, but it's to say, how can I walk up and down the line and help everyone else do more and do better?
Right.
Because someone has to do that for us to achieve more.
Totally.
Yeah. So let's talk about this. Some of the challenges you've had through that. You talk a little bit about yourselves like, I had to pull myself out of that at times because I maybe reverted to that in different tough times, like, oh, I need to go back and do more and not necessarily continue the course of I need to lead and drive our culture better. So how have you dealt with that as a leader in growing your own ability to lead?
You know what? I think the biggest thing for me was like I'm a recovering people pleaser, right?
Okay,
That's
that's
my that's
good.
my that's my saying. I'm a recovering people pleaser. So because I'm a people pleaser naturally, right? I always want people to work to like me, right? And as a
Yeah.
leader, that's not a good thing, right? Like because
No.
when you care about being liked more than you care about results, it's a big issue, right? And I think a
Yeah.
lot of people pleasers that are in leadership chairs go through that and they feel those struggles. That for me was probably the biggest learning curve of all that because it's like, if I had to give you feedback a couple years back, I'd be like, I would give you what we call like the bullshit sandwich, right? Where I'd
Yeah.
give you
Yeah. Totally.
like some really great stuff you're doing, some really bad stuff you're doing, and then some really great stuff you're doing again, right? And so I would literally go through what we call the BS sandwiches, and like, and I realized like, damn, like I'm holding my company back, I'm holding my team back by not giving them real, visceral feedback and real feedback, and that's where we shifted as our culture shifted to we are a DDO, right? We deliberately want to grow, right? So we declare that we want to grow, we want feedback. Feedback. If we're not getting feedback, we're being starved of oxygen. So we shifted our culture to be a delivery developmental organization, DDO. And so when we're in positions of like, wow, like, damn, you're like, John, I like your shirt today, but dude, your hair looks a little jacked up, man. Like my team is at that point where we can have really raw conversations and zero offense be taken by it because you're giving me feedback and feedback is you putting yourself in an uncomfortable position to better me. So I'm like, damn, like we look at it that way because our culture, our vibe is a better me and a better you is a better us. And so we want to help each other there. So that to me, developing that like
Yeah.
with our team and in our culture was the hardest thing because feedback from childhood on has always been a bad thing. Like, why are you telling me that
Hmm.
stuff? Like, I don't want to hear that. Like, you see your mom and dad fighting, and like, they don't want those feedbacks, right? Or like, if they're telling you, hey, you need to be home earlier. Why are you home late? Like, you don't want that feedback. So we grew up as children thinking like feedback is not good. Like, why are they being so, why it almost comes off as like that person's being an a-hole because they're being so raw with you, when in
Yeah.
reality, they're just putting themselves in an uncomfortable position to benefit you. And so I would say for me, that was like my massive, because once we started shifting that and everybody could just be radically transparent,
Yeah.
we just had different outcomes.
So I mean, there's a place where I've learned a lot about that in regard to, just ancient writings that talk about, flattery is not a healthy thing. It's like being
No.
honest and being, that's what a good friend does. But I want to ask about the trust that it took to build that within your culture, because to me, everything you shared about is awesome. And
Yeah.
where it is challenging is, do we have enough psychological safety? Do we have enough trust to where we can have that and people don't feel attacked and belittled? But yet it's like, no, like you just said, a better you and a better me is a better us. That's what we're aiming for.
Totally. And I think we got that. So part of some of the research we did was, before we introduced this to the team at large, we had to do this with my executive team, my leadership team first. And it was hard, right? And there's things called red arrow behaviors where, what does Tyler do that makes me feel like I can't tell you the truth, right? Is it your body
Yeah.
language? Is it your reactions? Like, what is it that you do that makes me say, fuck, I'm scared to tell Tyler the truth? Or I have to give him the shit sandwich, right? So we go through that and we dissect it with each other, and we do it. It's almost like a 13-week program where we go through and we share with each other feedback. So like, I'll present and say, hey, here's like the known red arrow behaviors that I have, and and here's how it's affected my relationships. So I'm acknowledging like me being somebody who is aggressive, or intensity. You mentioned your carnage everywhere. Like, that was me. Like, I was like, let's run, let's run. I was a people pleaser, but that wanted to run fast. And so like, we had to build that trust first, where they can tell me that feedback. Like, John, here's how you make me feel in these situations when I come to you with feedback, or here's how it feels when I'm struggling and I come to you and you come back to me with like motivational rah rah BS, right? And so I had to get all these things, and my ego took massive blows, but I needed it. So
Yeah.
that was step one of building the trust. Then when we introduced it to the team for psychological safety, there's this, and I can't believe that I'm forgetting the person's name, but there was something that happened. I'll paraphrase, so I don't mess
Yeah.
anything up. But in NASA, where before a rocket went
Oh
off,
yeah.
you
Yeah.
know that whole story where the one
Yeah.
guy
It was
knew
about,
knew something was wrong.
yeah, it was about the shuttle that exploded. So
Exactly.
the
And
Challenger shuttle. Yeah.
exactly. And the gentleman knew something was wrong with it. And I don't remember the exact like mechanics or whatever was wrong with it, but he didn't have psychological safety. So when
Yep.
he went to his boss and he said, hey, listen, dude, just as a heads up, this thing was, no, 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 it's good. It's good. We checked it. We checked it. And he didn't feel comfortable enough to go run the flagpole and say, hey, my boss is an a-hole. He's not listening to this. Like, I think there's an issue. He didn't have that mental health, that safety space in his organization. So we showed that whole video and the whole case study that NASA put out after that, to build a culture of psychological safety, and that's how we started the journey of
Okay.
feedback, through that video.
I think, with pieces of this you talk about, I think that's what a lot of organizations struggle with today,
Yeah,
is too many leaders are afraid. I would call what you just shared is it's their insecurities. And we
totally.
all have them. And the moment that we can address them, identify them, understand how our insecurities affect others, man, that's when we can start to really lead people. Until then,
Totally.
it's just this fake dance that people are doing, and you're not really sure why it's going on. It's sitting and thinking of situations, relationships currently for me, where it's like, yeah, these are hard situations. It's kind of those red arrow behaviors. Like, I get it. I understand. And
Yeah.
here's what's hard is, for someone who maybe is working at it like yourself, you can identify that in relationships.
Right.
Think about someone who's new in their career. When you were 20 or someone 22, 24, and they're trying to navigate it with all the other things going on in the world, man, it's overwhelming. And that's where they're like, I'm out. I'm gone. I'll go to
Yeah.
the next place. And we just see this revolving door until someone comes into an environment that's actually healthy. Does it mean it's all, rainbows, cotton candy, and teddy bears? No. But
Nope.
it's actually like, I care enough about you, going back to what we said earlier, to be honest with you. I need you to be honest with me. And if we can have that, man, we're all going to end up in a much healthier, better place.
Totally. Yeah.
So
100%.
how has that become not only the identifier of your business, but as a way to bring in new team members to say, hey, we care so much about you. We're devoted to this. I think about a friend of mine, Casey Crawford. They've done
Yeah.
that with Movement Mortgage, tremendous culture as well, based upon we are here to serve our community and serve people and love on people. And that's what I hear from you. So how much are you using that to differentiate and really help not only with the clients you serve, but outside of that, the families of the team members?
Yeah, man. And I'm so glad you said that because with us, that's the one thing we identified at this last conference. We fly in our team. We have international team, we have national team, and we fly them in once a year. And we have a big conference. It's like a 4 or 5 day conference where we have like speakers and all these big people that come in and talk and like we train and learn. And that was the biggest thing. We had about 4 of our clients that have been with us for a few years come in and give real feedback in front of our entire team in real live time, like no holds bar, like feedback. And we were like a little scared at first, right? Like, but I was excited about it. I was like, oh, we don't know what they're gonna say, right? We're like, don't tell us what you're gonna say. Just come, give us the real stuff, and we'll take care of it from there. And what I identified when I heard these business owners speaking was that everything they said had to do with how what we're doing is helping them hire more employees, put their kids through college, be able to give back to their communities, whether it's through charity or their own time. And so I was like, guys, at the end of the conference, I went up there like I was Ric Flair, freaking screaming. And I was like, guys, like what I just, do you know what I just heard after this whole conference and having our clients speak? We don't just serve businesses, we serve families, we serve all these different people. So when you said that, it really
Oh,
resonated with me. But
yeah.
um, I think that right there being the core identity and everybody knowing when they're coming into the company, even new team members, like things like that, like, it really comes down to everybody to an extent at most jobs, right? They feel like if they're going to be fired, like silently, they're going to be silent fired or people silently quit and stuff. And don't get me wrong, that stuff's going to happen no matter where you go.
Yep.
But we're so transparent here that like when people are like, hey, we're going to leave, like we make it at any of my companies, right? We make it so comfortable. Like, yeah, it's fine. Like, listen, if somebody has to leave and go somewhere, that's understandable. People have different life situations. People have different priorities.
Yeah.
People have different agendas, goals. So like we make it like we're gonna be just as happy for you the day you walked in these doors virtually that as the day you leave us. Because at the end of the day, like we're here now that I have my first child too, which has buttered me up to people. Because it's like you see other humans, and I want people to treat my son with respect and dignity, right? And that means if I want that to my son, I have to put that out into the world, right?
Yep.
So the same concept there, and people know that. So when we interview people, we're so radical about that. Like, listen, if we're going to let you go, we give people a 60-day notice if we're going to fire you. So you have the ability to go look for jobs, go, do what you need to do, no pressure. So you're not like just fired one day and have to like figure out like, well, how am I going to pay my rent or my mortgage or my whatever? So I'd say those types of feedback and radical transparencies and how we operate that way been a good way for us to like, make people, and it takes, I will tell you, Tyler, it does take time because for people who have never been in a
Yeah.
feedback driven organization where you're getting that like legit feedback, like it takes a while for them to be able to like have that visceral reaction that this is good, this is for me,
Yeah.
like this is not them being a jerk to me. So yeah.
There's a book that, again, you've read a few books. I read a few books, have a book
Yep.
club. American Icon by Alan Mulally. And when Alan took over at Ford, and that was one of the things that he brought to the culture first and foremost is we have to be radically, I guess, honest with each other, like what's
100%.
going on. And Ford was losing so much money. And, he says it at some point, it's like, you know what? We love you. We care about you, but you can't work here anymore. So
Right.
what can we do to find you a place? And it kind of those stories, just like what you're sharing, to me, that's what a socially conscious business does. It isn't about giving to all these aid situations. It isn't that. It's take care of your people
Yeah.
in such a way that you understand they have a life outside of
Yep.
your business.
Right.
And I hear that from you. And I think from a leadership adage, and I appreciate you sharing, becoming a father helped you recognize that.
Yeah.
And there are those elements of being a parent that help you understand, like, oh, I need to be not an a-hole. I need to be a better person. It's helped
Totally.
me grow personally. So I appreciate you sharing that. One
Yeah, man.
last question that I'm thinking here. You're a product of it. I was a product of parents that struggled financially, being in situations where I had to work.
Yeah.
Your success, the success my family's had, my children will be different. Your
Yep.
son will be different, and
Yep.
future children will be different. How do you, as a leader, look at him and say, I want him to go through the struggles that I went through, but also then as a leader, make sure that you ensure that the people that you work with are going through enough adversity that they grow to become stronger too?
Yeah. So are you asking that in regards to my children or
Both,
just
both, all of it.
yeah, yeah. So I would say I'll start with because to me I think they're different. Um,
Okay.
I would say with my family, my kids, my son obviously I have one right now, but we want more. But
Yeah.
what I would say there would be I know there's that whole saying or whatever where it's like you have the guy who struggles and then and it's difficult times make hard men and hard men make easy times and then easy times make weak men and the whole
Yep.
story. And it's like I'm setting up my kid so that he's going to be successful. Um, but but no matter what though, like what I said to my wife the second that we like wanted to start having kids was like, I need so Johnny is my son. I was like, I need Johnny to go through, right, in his own way, what I went through, but
Yeah.
for his journey. And there's this whole
Yeah.
thing where uh, Jerry Seinfeld was on the Tonight Show, and they were asking him, they go, dude, they go, they're talking about his kids and stuff, and is his kid spoiled and stuff, and he's like, I have this rule, my kids know this, the first time they ever asked me, they were like in middle school, and they're like, Dad, are we rich? And he's like, no, I'm rich. You're not rich. And the one thing for my children, like to me, like money doesn't motivate me the way it used to, right? So like when people like
Yeah.
I have friends, I have family, I have people who are like, super successful in their own ways. I have success in my ways. The way that I look at success, to me is like, listen, I literally, retired my mom. I helped my parents with their home. Like those are my metrics. Like that's how I compare my metrics. And I want my son to grow up that way. But it's the art of no, right? And so when my son is like, "Hey, I want a new car or I want whatever," like, and I know I can do it, like, no, you gotta do it. I'm not giving you that. You got to
Yeah.
do that,
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that's a difference for me now. And hearing that no is gonna stir some like, well, I'm pissed at you or I hate you because like my friends
Yeah.
have all this cool shit and I can't get it, and
Yeah.
I know you can get it for me, right? As he gets
Yeah.
older and more wiser, but I'm not going to be that parent. I refuse.
Yeah.
Like so, there are going to be things that he's going to have to do. Like he's going to have to buy his first car. He's going to have to buy the stuff he wants to buy. Like it's going to have to be on him. Like the chores thing, whatever. Like there's
Yeah.
nothing that's going to ever just be like he's going to understand the actual method. And there's this group that's a nonprofit group that I'm going to put him through. But it's financial literacy for kids,
Yeah.
and it's all different levels. And they teach parents like how to make kids understand earning versus getting. And the people who founded this during COVID, they're two financial. One's a teacher, and this other lady is in the financial game. And she said that she was sitting at the table, and her son like broke a glass, and she was like, what the heck? What like that was expensive, whatever. And he goes, just buy another one on Amazon. And that mentality is scary because that is true. Everything just
Yeah.
boom, boom, boom. And so for me, it was like that's what I have to change. So they built this whole like education system and platform to teach parents how to teach the kids how to earn from like literally an infant through preschool to first grade, second grade, and then all the way through high school and stuff. But like that's going to be what I'm doing for my son. Now for
That's awesome.
team,
Yeah.
for team because I don't feel bad for myself, right? Like I would be a fool if I felt bad for myself now looking back, right? Like, but
Yeah.
but when people go through their own struggles and journeys, like I I'm not people know this very well. If somebody like my family, like that's an elder or like an older person or like a friend of mine who like is older or something and just like they don't have them, they're not going to go back on the streets and hit the streets and try to make money. Like they're in their 70s or 80s or whatever. Those are people that I 100% will open the checkbook and be like, "What do you need? I'm going to take care of you." But if somebody's still young and they're just being lazy, right? Or they're like going through some tough shit, listen, like I'm a Catholic and I'm religious, and I think that God gives like people the opportunities. Life doesn't happen to you; it happens for you, right?
Yep.
So whether you believe in the universe or whatever, it's like, at the end of the day, in those circumstances, me interceding and being like, boom, here's the life, here's the
Yeah.
safety float. Like it's actually hurting them in some cases,
Yep.
and so with people, I'm a tough love guy. I'm not a soft love guy. So for me, like especially in those types of positions, I'm not like the boom life raft. Here you go. I'm gonna save you. I got you.
Yeah.
Like if it's my wife, every day I'm doing that. If it's my
Yeah.
son, in some ways, every day I'm doing that. If my parents, I would do anything for them. But it's like people around you, they need to go through their shit. I had to go through it. You had to go through it. You're on the farm.
Yep.
You were getting after it. You're in the beaten sun. You were doing the things you had to do, right? And it's like for me to step in and stop that for somebody,
Yeah.
it's not going to help them.
You take it away from them. When we're throwing out life preservers instead of teaching people how to swim, too many people are going to drown. And it's just the
Totally.
reality. It's teach people how to swim. And that's what I hear from you. So
Totally,
it's
man.
good. Well, John, thank you so much. This has been great. Super amount of wisdom, your experiences growing, the leadership examples that you've figured out. I appreciate you being here, sharing with me, man.
Yeah, dude. Thank you so much. Can I ask you a final question?
Yeah, please.
I like to any podcast that I'm on or on my own podcast,
Yeah,
which I would love to have you on, by the way.
sure.
I like to ask this question. And so somebody like yourself who is very leadership driven, obviously you have a great head on your shoulders, you're a hard worker, you have a family. A lot of times we talk about legacy, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so for you, I asked this on my show, so I'm giving you a little sneak preview.
Yeah.
But, for your children, what would you want, your youngest, like if they were out somewhere one day when you're not around and somebody said, "What was your dad like?" What do you want them to say?
I'm going to read the Father's Day card he gave me.
Oh,
It's sitting
dude.
here on my desk.
Oh my goodness.
And so as we're recording this, Father's Day was yesterday.
Yes.
And this is what he wrote. He's 13. Thank you so much for being my dad. I'm so grateful to be the son of a great leader, friend, and father. Thank you so much for teaching me to throw a ball, shoot a basketball, and tie my shoe. Happy Father's Day.
Dude, I literally
I
have the
think-
chills right now.
Yeah, well, we'll get that.
Dude.
Those are the things that my mission is, and this is part of where I'm so health conscious.
Yeah.
Not because I'm a freak about it, but I eat well, I take care of myself, I'm active.
Yeah.
My dad, who devoted so much, worked so hard as a farming, owning business, doing those things. Health wasn't, and it was a generation too, where it's kind of like, oh, you take a pill for that, you'll fix that. I want to be able to, when my son is 23, to say, hey, where do we go? Let's do it together. And to me, that's where I keep trying to lead by example. And that's the legacy of, as he shared, I want him, when he's a father, that he's teaching his son do those things. There's things that, I wish I was better at. I wish I made it, in some ways a little easier. When I was 13, the responsibilities I had growing up on our farm was a lot. My
Right.
kids don't have that. I wish I was able to put that more on them.
Right.
But yet it's kind of, part of that conversation was hearing how you're going about it. I mean, your son's young and, it's going to evolve and change in years. But when I look at that and I see that example, and it's no different from that, someone who's on our team, a kid that I coach, a kid that I've coached 10 years ago, I hope to impart that on them.
Yeah.
So we're like, okay, that's an example of leadership that if I don't have it otherwise, like you talked about having bad examples that were like, I need to do it better for people.
Yeah.
I want them to be able to say, even though he was, he had his mistakes, he had his faults, he had to deal with things, he still was constantly driving to say, how can I do better
Right.
for other people? So
Yeah, man.
That's
I
my
love
answer.
that just made my whole day, dude. I'm so glad I'm glad you read that letter or that card from your son. That's great stuff and that's so amazing. And thank you for sharing that.
yeah, well, I appreciate you being here, man. Look forward to developing more of this conversation over time. So again, thanks for being here, dude.
Thank you, man.
Not only did that very last question, when John turned the tables on me and asked me and shared the card for my son as I actually sit here, it's in this stack of cards that I got. But it's also the nature in which John has understood what's so important about his business and things that, as we talked about, he didn't really understand, realize, but yet it's exactly how he leads and why he leads. And there was one comment that he shared, and hopefully you caught it. There's two elements here that I want to, the DDO, the Delivery Development Organization, Man, that excites me. I believe that every organization, their role and responsibility is through the development for themselves, the people in their business, and anyone outside. That's what it's every business. And then number 2 is the red arrow behaviors. As I look down at my notes in the 13-week program, man, how great is that? An organization so focused on saying, we need to be real with each other. We have to have those moments where we can be honest and vulnerable and know it's not to fix anyone, but it's to make the most of it. As I sit here right now, the desk that holds up this camera, the desk that I work at, on the top of it, it's nice and smooth, and it's got a polyurethane cover to it. But underneath, it's not. It's rough. It's not sanded. It's not polyurethane. And every once in a while, when I sit down at my desk, depending on the clothes that I'm wearing, the pants that I'm wearing, there's a few splinters, a few things that get into my shorts. And this is what I realize about having that ability within an organization, as John talked about, that development. The beauty of the table is not lost because it's sanded and protected on top. It actually makes it way more inviting and usable and purposeful. But yet underneath, yeah, that's really what it is. It's okay. And as I slide my fingers along and as I'm talking about this, and I have little pieces of wood that slide into my fingers, oh, that hurts. We can be like that as people. And sanding it and putting polyurethane doesn't reduce the viability, the beauty, the quality of this table. What actually does is it invites others and it's more endearing. And so when I take that lesson from John about the red arrow behaviors and understand how much of our red arrow behaviors are like the underside of this table, and it takes away from the beauty and the function. So I'm going to leave you with that thought. Thanks for joining in. Thanks for being here. As always, 2 things that I'd love for you to do. Share this with someone else. That they get value, that they see the experiences that John has had, and maybe it inspires and motivates them. And then number 2, so this podcast can reach more people, I'd love for you to share, subscribe, review. It's through those reviews that more people get to see and hear from guests such as John. Thanks for being here. Till next time, have a good one.